Hello, I am the Script Doctor, and welcome to the channel. The fourth episode of Star Trek Picard has aired, and while it is somewhat of an improvement over the previous three in regards to being a more contained mini-story that adds to the overall journey, the episode itself doesn't really have much else going for it. The show still suffers from a meandering pace and a lack of convincing action or behavior from the characters. Also, by starting these episodes with flashbacks, I feel that I am being teased with an idea of a far more interesting show than what we're actually getting. Allow me to provide context, that being that 14 years ago a star is about to go supernova and threaten the Romulan Empire. The Romulans need to evacuate all planets within the blast radius of that star if they are to save their people and culture. This is a ticking clock. The Federation reaches out to assist in the evacuation by building a massive fleet to transport the Romulans to new planets. This is the goal. Since the Federation doesn't have enough ships, they will need to build them quickly before the star goes nova. These elements combined give us urgency. The androids assisting with the construction are hacked and destroy the shipyards on Mars along with the transport ships that have recently been completed, thus raising the stakes regarding the survival of the Romulans. These stakes are raised again when Starfleet refuses to continue with the evacuation and bans synthetic labor as well, completely preventing any feasible means of saving the Romulans and bringing up a debate as to whether one party should risk the lives to save a former or possibly current enemy that faces annihilation. But do we get to see that type of story in Star Trek Picard? No, we get told that story through boring exposition and flashbacks. What do we get in the present story? A girl with an android brain seeks out Picard and is murdered in front of him by Romulans that are part of a covert operation. Picard takes it upon himself to save this girl's twin sister that he was told about by another character because the script says so. Without that knowledge, Picard has no further motivation to explore this story. Because of this, he needs to get a ship and start his mission to find Bruce Maddox, who has gone missing and may have answers regarding the girl and where she could be. Why he thinks this, we don't know, other than because the script says so. I'm not really entertained by the present story as I am about the one evacuating Romulans and hacked androids. In my opinion, we are told a story 14 years after the more interesting one has happened. Granted, there are still 6 episodes left in this season, so it could potentially get more interesting, but to me, as a writer, I have to ask, why waste 40% of your show on boring moments instead of getting into the meat of your story? Please be advised that this review will contain spoilers. If you don't want to be spoiled, please feel free to return to my review after having seen the episode. Episode 4, Absolute Candor, starts with a flashback to a Romulan relocation planet. Picard, dressed for vacation, beams in and is greeted by the locals who are eager for his attention. We do get a fairly inventive way of expanding Romulan lore with Picard meeting the Kuat Malat, a sisterhood of warriors that express themselves with absolute candor. It seems to me that this planet or settlement was theirs originally, and they have opened it up for Romulan refugees being resettled on a new world. These sisters have taken in an orphan boy who idolizes Picard. The story beats of this scene are quite good, a large improvement over what has come before. However, I'm bothered a little by the embellished performance coming out of Picard when he speaks to the young boy. It feels almost patronizing, but that's just my interpretation. Perhaps, given that we've seen Picard mostly with low energy and in a position of being talked down to and verbally accosted, that when we see him confident and committed to helping, it throws a wrench in the gears of Picard's character. I found it quite endearing to see Picard's interaction with this young child. When it comes to children, Picard has come a long way since his first appearance and encounter at Farpoint. However, this situation does feel a little one-sided. I can understand why a child could idolize Picard, but I think we're missing something from the child where we can understand why Picard would like him. When we're introduced to him, he's stealing some fruit or vegetable and telling a Romulan to bite me. Is this really the type of child Picard would like? Picard is established as a character that appreciates art, history, fencing, philosophy, exploration, and detective stories. Why doesn't the child go up to Picard excited to tell him that he's mapped out a new area of the compound since his last visit? Or get excited to show him a new fencing technique he learned? We see the two fencing later, why not have that be a part of the child's introduction? Some sort of commonality that the two could share and earn respect for one another. Sadly, I'm not seeing it. Character relationships are developed through personal conflict or personal commonality. When introducing a new character to an existing character's life, the audience needs to understand the relationship. They like each other because of this, or they despise each other because of that. When it comes to this boy, I know he likes Picard because Picard brings him things. Not a great reason for us, the audience, to attach themselves to a character that can be easily swayed with gifts, but it is character development, and that's been a little rare so far in this series. The next part of that relationship to develop is why does Picard like the boy? Let's take a look at a similar situation in the Season 4 Episode 2 story from The Next Generation called Family. In this episode, Picard meets his nephew Rene, and the interaction between them is fun, sweet, and conveys to the audience why these two will get along. It is done quickly and effectively. The rest of Picard's story in that episode shows the commonality between these two characters, and from that commonality, Picard's brother Robert sees Jean-Luc in his son. He does what is needed to get his brother back on track, managing to repair the broken relationship between them and support Rene's dreams of joining Starfleet. The only critique I have for that episode is to cut out the Wesley Crusher bit, use it for another story, and use that available time to give us another scene between Rene and Picard. Perhaps they're stargazing. Picard telling Rene a story about constellations, or a planet he explored whose star we can see from Earth. It would be touching and give a little bit extra to the end shot of Rene stargazing by himself. But I digress. Essentially, in the episode Family, we get an organic understanding of the relationships between these characters, but in Picard we're told,
"I like you very much,"
that they like each other because the script says so. Absolute candor feels like a cheat for the writers to get out of exposition without having to focus on the choice of words the character would use in the normal circumstances of these situations. It's basically setting up a condition where on-the-nose dialogue is the way of the people, which in actuality means we don't need to think about this character's voice, just write the first thing that comes to your mind and that's what he'll say. In other words, the writer spent more time coming up with a way to excuse on-the-nose dialogue for a character than coming up with great dialogue. After a quick montage of Picard's interactions with the child named Elnor, he is taken away when Raffi informs him of the attack on Mars. The montage is somewhat good, a little one-sided. We're seeing Picard read and fence with Elnor, but it's not balanced. Is there nothing Elnor can show Picard to establish a foundation of the relationship? For instance, Elnor leading a hike and pointing out things to Picard, or perhaps a simple game of hide-and-seek? Anything that would develop this character and allow us to understand why Picard likes his company. Again, audiences need to be able to grasp the depth of a relationship if you want us to feel something when it is threatened by conflict. So far, I'm not seeing anything of real substance between Picard and Elnor to evoke any feelings. Speaking of evoking feelings, the feeling of boredom hits pretty hard after the credits when we are literally seeing a character that is bored, desperately trying to find something to do or talk about. Jurati is trying to be clever and quippy to Rios as they await arrival to their destination. She pontificates about the galaxy. She expresses how there are over 3 billion stars in our galaxy, and while that is true, she's a little bit on the low end of that estimate. It's sad when writers on a science fiction program can't get science correct. For those wondering, our galaxy, known as the Milky Way, has approximately 400 billion stars. Sure, she's only 397 billion off the mark, but then again, this so-called expert in synthetic life thinks you can clone a positronic neuron, again, which is not a thing, to create a positronic brain inside of a biological life form. Also, in the 3, now 4 episodes with her character, she has not once demonstrated any skill or proper knowledge about computers or positronic brains for me to believe that she is qualified. She speaks more about Bruce Maddox's theories and that she studies things, but she doesn't demonstrate any actual knowledge of her own. She has told us she is qualified, but have we seen her show any results? Was she the one that found the critical error in the synths 14 years ago? Did she argue that she could correct it and was denied? Has she demonstrated any way to confirm Picard's theory about Dahj and her sister being Data's offspring? What has she done to really prove her value to anyone aside from saying, "Check it out, I have a dismantled B4 in my dresser"? Then we get to Rios, who is in a state of arrested development, whose mind has recently been blown away, and thinks he's enlightened after reading a book about the existential pain of living with the consciousness of death. In other words, it's a book about how we all die at some point. Yeah, the concept sucks. But you can either let it depress you or choose to make the short time you have mean something to yourself and those you encounter. This guy is just a fedora, silk scarf, tinted sunglasses, and a hacky sack away from being a snobby layabout, sponging off his parents while criticizing the establishment instead of actively working to better themselves and their situation. This character development scene doesn't go anywhere, and is thankfully interrupted by Raffi, all hot and bothered by a course change. Apparently they're going to Vashti, the planet we saw in the opening. Before we can get an answer as to why Picard has changed course, the production needs a scene to explain why the show is still using Picard's chateau set while he's on a spaceship. Cue the emergency hospitality hologram. Since when is hospitality an emergency? Is this an issue in the 24th century? Have you ever found yourself at home peacefully reading a book on the existential pain of living with the consciousness of death, when all of a sudden 24 strangers invite themselves over to have a party? You want to be a good indentured host and frantically replicate whatever you can to meet your unwanted guests' needs, but sadly, they're not impressed and you're going to look like the town jerk for not being prepared. Well, worry not, because we at the Superfluous Home Inventory Trade Store have a solution for you. Meet the Emergency Hospitality Hologram, an artificial intelligence not banned by the Federation along with the synths for some reason, that can take all the stress of surprise guest visits and execute a fantastic impromptu party that'll make you the talk of the town. They'll replicate, they'll serve, they'll host, they'll even clean up the mess your guests will leave behind so you don't have to. Take a look at our Superfluous Home Inventory Trade Store and see if an Emergency Hospitality Hologram is right for you. Getting back on track, Raffi bickers at Picard for taking a side quest to Vashti instead of going to Freecloud. We learn that Vashti isn't what it once was and is no longer protected by the Venomous Rangers, whatever those are. We also learn that Picard's intention for going to this planet is to pick up a Quat Malat who will side with his cause. According to Rios, they are warrior nuns, and Picard tells us that they are the most formidable fighters he has ever seen and an enemy to the Tal Shiar. Well, it's nice to see Picard has a clear goal in mind during this mission. It's just a little silly that he had 2 former Tal Shiar agents working for him as housekeepers and chose to leave them to tend his vines instead of bringing them along on his mission. It's almost as if these 2 characters only existed to facilitate the plot instead of being fully fleshed out characters that would contribute to the story in a meaningful way. Because we've spent 15 minutes with Picard, it's now time to see what Soji is up to on the Borg Cube. But only for a minute. Here, she learns from an archived interview of Ramda the Romulan that the tale of the Destroyer is one that brings about the end of life everywhere, which is something we as an audience could infer from the term the Destroyer. This scene is only repeating information we learned from the previous episode. There is no real additional context given to it. At best, it appears to be the Romulans' own take on the apocalypse as written in the New Testament. Thankfully, we don't stay any longer on this derivative idea and return to Picard, who has arrived in orbit of Vashti and is awaiting for authorization to beam down to the settlement. We learn that Picard isn't highly thought of anymore, as his mere presence isn't greeted with open arms. Rios suggests bribing the officials on the planet, and in the next shot, Picard beams to the surface to find a once vibrant settlement now desolate and pale. No one is interested or even acknowledges Picard's arrival. He sees a few Romulans wearing patches on their arms. This could possibly be representative of the Romulan rebirth movement Raffi spoke of in passing earlier. As Picard asks for help from the Quat Malar, Elnor, now grown up, appears and renders Picard speechless. While he figures out what to say, we see the writers trying to figure out a sequence with Soji, where she watches over an unconscious Ramda, to an exposition scene at a bar between her and Narek, and ends with them sliding in a Borg cube as part of some ancient Borg ritual. What does this all mean? Nothing. The only thing I learned from this is that Narek is a fan of Xena, Warrior Princess. Soji gets all indignant when Narek finds an incongruity with her arrival records, and before that can escalate, we zip back to Picard asking for help and being told to take the grown Elnor who, although trained as a warrior nun, can never be one in the eyes of the Quat Malat because he is male. The question that isn't brought up is if Elnor wants to be a Quat Malat. If so, there are surgeries he can undergo to become female and earn that title. If not, then what does it matter? Why bring this subject of conversation up? If gender doesn't block one from being trained like a Quat Malat, then why is it an issue to begin with? Picard tells Elnor of his mission. He's able to do this in less than a minute, which goes to show how much more time was wasted over the last 3 episodes. Picard tells Elnor that he is needed because he's an old man and is not physically capable for what this mission needs. Elnor refuses due to having abandonment issues with Picard. I guess Picard will have to tell his story to another, and I suppose no one else felt that his quest was worthy, so Picard returns to the main village and awaits for his transport window to open. Instead of minding his own business, which is essentially the prime directive he has lived by most of his life, he tosses aside a Romulan-only sign and demands to be served at a restaurant. He is supposed to be leaving in less than 7 minutes. Why would he sit down to get a drink or a meal? Has anyone ever seen how long it takes 90-year-olds to eat? I don't care about the advances in medical science for the 24th century, he's going to be there for at least an hour. Well, other Romulans appear to have this knowledge about old people as well and approach Picard. They don't demand that he leave, but instead, after an impassioned speech about the Federation exploiting Romulans at their weakest, demands to duel Picard in the town square. Picard refuses and Elnor shows up to behead the assaulting Romulan and bind his sword to Picard's quest.
You can count on my steel.
Well, that was easy. Picard is not too pleased with Elnor's actions, and while aboard the ship orders Elnor to swear to only fight when Picard deems it necessary. Picard hasn't done anything to warrant a change in the heart for Elnor. The only thing Picard has done is refuse to fight. Is this all it takes for a Qowat Milat to work with someone? For them to refuse to defend themselves? Apparently so, as we learn in the next scene that only a Qowat Milat agrees to a quest if it is a lost cause. Oh boy, that's a great way to raise the stakes. Have one character tell us that their mission is hopeless without once showing us an obstacle that would convey as such. Back on the cube, Narek's sister wakes him up in a very creepy way. She's disappointed that Narek isn't working as fast as she'd like. There appears to be a lot of misunderstanding when it comes to Soji and her kind. Narek's mission is to find out what Soji knows about where she came from. Soji doesn't know anything, most likely due to her being a sleeper agent of sorts, and so is of no use to Narek or the Zhat Vash at this point. They don't want to activate her because... well, that's not exactly explained. Perhaps we're to believe that she'll be an unstoppable force, but if that were true, Dahj wouldn't have died in the first episode. Narek's sister tells him that he is under a time constraint, so that means that these Zhat Vash have an urgent need for this information. So the question I raise is this: why not restrain Soji, activate her, and then probe her for more information? Why all the theatrics? Sadly, this comes across as another because the script says so moment, and not because of a thought-out strategy. This scene should be one that ends the episode given its dramatic setup of Narek only having a week to get what is needed before his sister comes in and messes everything up. But instead, we get an action set piece tacked on at the end. The ship Picard is on is under fire by an ancient Romulan bird of prey. While the designs are cool and the set piece somewhat fun to watch, I have to ask how our heroes got here. The last we saw Picard, he had assembled his team, and as they walked to the bridge on the other side of the room, everything appeared fine. Why didn't they immediately warp out? Are we supposed to think that the moment they beamed aboard they were attacked? If so, why cut away from that and give us this scene between Narek and his sister? The organization of these scenes is rather poor. When we cut away from one character or location to another, that is to suggest a passage of time will occur until we return to the aforementioned character or location. There is a way around this, and that is by editing in the arrival of the conflict and cutting away from it before it gets serious. You then insert the other scene and return a few moments later where the conflict has grown and we watch that set piece play out. But we don't get that here. What we do get is Rios dodging a shot and calling it a near miss. A near miss is a hit. A near hit is a miss. How do these writers not know that?
When two planes almost collide, they call it a near miss. It's a near hit. A collision is a near miss. Look, they nearly missed.
Well, for some reason, a 130-year-old Romulan bird of prey is giving a far more advanced and recently constructed ship a run for its money. Rios activates Emmett, another emergency hologram, to operate the tactical console. He'll shoot while Rios pilots. It's a little tricky to determine who says what between the two because first, they're played by the same actor, and second, they're speaking Spanish. For some reason, the hologram also behaves as if they're drunk or stoned, which is, useful. It almost distracts me from asking why the heck these guys aren't just warping away. The ship is capable of outmaneuvering the bird of prey. Why not just get behind it, engage the warp drive, drop out a few light years away, set a course for Freecloud, and you're in the clear? You want to know why they don't do that? Say it with me, viewers. Because the script says so. They need to have this scene to introduce a ship to help them fight off the bird of prey, then rescue the pilot who is revealed to be 7 of 9. They beam her in by the bridge, which is odd because the transporter pad is around 20 feet behind them. So why beam her right here by the bridge and not on the transporter pad within eyesight? As contrived as the characters' actions and plot points are for this episode, it is still rather superior to what we've seen before. This is the first episode of Picard that has a self-contained objective that the main character achieves. Picard's goal was to get help from the Qowat Milat. He got Elnor to join him, and they're good to go. This episode comes across to me as if it were the last act of a 2-part pilot. Where the first 3 episodes could have been reworked into a solid hour of story, this episode felt like it needed a bit more focus on this settlement, addressing the result of the Federation's abandonment of the Romulans and Picard's relationship with Elnor. What we get between these two just scratches the surface, but in the most minimal of ways. But, now that we appear to have the entire crew together, the story might finally begin to take shape and get somewhere. Or maybe it won't. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. If you have anything to add to this episode, please leave a comment below. Thank you for watching, and never forget, it all starts with the script.